Chapter 1. A group which barely missed becoming historic by Victor Hugo from the book Les Misérables. At that epoch, which was, to all appearances, indifferent, a certain revolutionary quiver was vaguely current. Breaths which had started forth from the depths of 89 and 93 were in the air. Youth was on the point, may the reader pardon us the word, of molting. People were undergoing a transformation, almost without being conscious of it, through the movement of the age. The needle which moves round the compass also moves in souls. Each person was taking that step in advance, which he was bound to take. The royalists were becoming liberals, liberals were turning democrats. It was a flood tide complicated with 1,000 ebb movements. The peculiarity of ebbs is to create intermixtures, hence the combination of very singular ideas. People adored both Napoleon and liberty. We are making history here. These were the mirages of that period. Opinions traverse phases. Voltairean royalism, a quaint variety, had a no less singular sequel, Bonapartist liberalism. Other groups of minds were more serious. In that direction, they sounded principles, they attached themselves to the right. They grew enthusiastic for the absolute, they caught glimpses of infinite realizations. The absolute, by its very rigidity, urges spirits towards the sky and causes them to float in illimitable space. There is nothing like dogma for bringing forth dreams, and there is nothing like dreams for engendering the future. Utopia today, flesh and blood tomorrow. These advanced opinions had a double foundation. A beginning of mystery menaced the established order of things, which was suspicious and underhand. A sign which was revolutionary to the highest degree. The second thoughts of power meet the second thoughts of the populace in the mine. The incubation of insurrections gives the retort to the premeditation of coups d'état. There did not, as yet, exist in France any of those vast underlying organizations, like the German Tugendbund and Italian Carbonarism, but here and there were dark underminings, which were in process of throwing off shoots. The cowgird was being outlined at Aix. There existed at Paris, among other affiliations of that nature, the Society of the Friends of the ABC. What were these Friends of the AB 100? A society which had for its object apparently the education of children, in reality the elevation of man. They declared themselves the Friends of the AB 100, the abaissé, the debased, that is to say, the people. They wished to elevate the people. It was a pun which we should do wrong to smile at. Puns are sometimes serious factors in politics. Witness the castratus ad castra which made a general of the army of Narses. Witness, barbari et barbarini. Witness, tu es petrus et super hanc petram, etc., etc. The Friends of the AB 100 were not numerous. It was a secret society in the state of embryo. We might almost say a coterie, if coteries ended in heroes. They assembled in Paris in 2 localities, near the fish market, in a wine shop called Corinth, of which more will be heard later on, and near the Pantheon in a little café in the Rue Saint-Michel called the Café Musain, now torn down. The first of these meeting places was close to the working man, the second to the students. The assemblies of the Friends of the AB 100 were usually held in a back room of the Café Musain. This hall, which was tolerably remote from the café, with which it was connected by an extremely long corridor, had 2 windows and an exit with a private stairway on the little Rue des Grès. There they smoked and drank, and gambled and laughed. There they conversed in very loud tones about everything, and in whispers of other things. An old map of France under the Republic was nailed to the wall, a sign quite sufficient to excite the suspicion of a police agent. The greater part of the Friends of the AB 100 were students, who were on cordial terms with the working classes. Here are the names of the principal ones. They belong, in a certain measure, to history: Enjolras, Comefera, Jean Prouvaire, Feuilly, Courfeyrac, Bahorel, Lescal or Legal, Joly, Grantaire. These young men formed a sort of family, through the bond of friendship. All, with the exception of Legal, were from the south. This was a remarkable group. It vanished in the invisible depths which lie behind us. At the point of this drama which we have now reached, it will not perhaps be superfluous to throw a ray of light upon these youthful heads, before the reader beholds them plunging into the shadow of a tragic adventure. Enjolras, whose name we have mentioned first of all, the reader shall see why later on, was an only son and wealthy. Enjolras was a charming young man who was capable of being terrible. He was angelically handsome. He was a savage Antinous. One would have said, to see the pensive thoughtfulness of his glance, that he had already, in some previous state of existence, traversed the revolutionary apocalypse. He possessed the tradition of it as though he had been a witness. He was acquainted with all the minute details of the great affair, a pontifical and warlike nature, a singular thing in a youth. He was an officiating priest and a man of war, from the immediate point of view, a soldier of the democracy, above the contemporary movement, the priest of the ideal. His eyes were deep, his lids a little red, his lower lip was thick and easily became disdainful, his brow was lofty. A great deal of brow in a face is like a great deal of horizon in a view. Like certain young men at the beginning of this century and the end of the last, who became illustrious at an early age, he was endowed with excessive youth, and was as rosy as a young girl, although subject to hours of pallor. Already a man, he still seemed a child. His 22 years appeared to be but 17. He was serious. It did not seem as though he were aware there was on earth a thing called woman. He had but one passion, the right, but one thought to overthrow the obstacle. On Mount Aventine he would have been Gracchus, in the Convention he would have been Saint Just. He hardly saw the roses, he ignored spring, he did not hear the caroling of the birds. The bare throat of Evadne would have moved him no more than it would have moved Aristogiton. He, like Harmodius, thought flowers good for nothing except to conceal the sword. He was severe in his enjoyments. He chastely dropped his eyes before everything which was not the Republic. He was the marble lover of liberty. His speech was harshly inspired, and had the thrill of a hymn. He was subject to unexpected outbursts of soul. Woe to the love affair, which should have risked itself beside him. If any grisette of the place Cambrai or the Rue Saint-Jean-de-Beauvais, seeing that face of a youth escaped from college, that page's mien, those long, golden lashes, those blue eyes, that hair billowing in the wind, those rosy cheeks, those fresh lips, those exquisite teeth, had conceived an appetite for that complete Aurora, and had tried her beauty on Enjolras, an astounding and terrible glance would have promptly shown her the abyss, and would have taught her not to confound the mighty cherub of Ezekiel with the gallant cherubino of Beaumarchais. By the side of Enjolras, who represented the logic of the revolution, Commiphera represented its philosophy. Between the logic of the revolution and its philosophy there exists this difference, that its logic may end in war, whereas its philosophy can end only in peace. Commiphera complemented and rectified Enjolras. He was less lofty but broader. He desired to pour into all minds the extensive principles of general ideas. He said, "Revolution, but civilization," and around the mountain peak he opened out a vast view of the blue sky. The revolution was more adapted for breathing with Commiphera than with Enjolras. Enjolras expressed its divine right, and Commiphera its natural right. The first attached himself to Robespierre, the second confined himself to Condorcet. Commiphera lived the life of all the rest of the world more than did Enjolras. If it had been granted to these two young men to attain to history, the one would have been the just, the other the wise man. Enjolras was the more virile, Commiphera the more humane. Homo and ver, that was the exact effect of their different shades. Commiphera was as gentle as Enjolras was severe, through natural whiteness. He loved the word citizen, but he preferred the word man. He would gladly have said, hombre, like the Spanish. He read everything, went to the theaters, attended the courses of public lecturers, learned the polarization of light from Arago, grew enthusiastic over a lesson in which Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire explained the double function of the external carotid artery, and the internal, the one which makes the face, and the one which makes the brain. He kept up with what was going on. Science step by step, compared Saint Simon with Fourier, deciphered hieroglyphics, broke the pebble which he found and reasoned on geology, drew from memory a silkworm moth, pointed out the faulty French in the dictionary of the Academy, studied Puységur and Deleuze, affirmed nothing, not even miracles, denied nothing, not even ghosts, turned over the files of the Moniteur, reflected. He declared that the future lies in the hand of the schoolmaster, and busied himself with educational questions. He desired that society should labor without relaxation at the elevation of the moral and intellectual level, at coining science, at putting ideas into circulation, at increasing the mind in youthful persons, and he feared lest the present poverty of method, the paltriness from a literary point of view, confined to 2 or 3 centuries called classic, the tyrannical dogmatism of official pedants, scholastic prejudices and routines, should end by converting our colleges into artificial oyster beds. He was learned, a purist exact, a graduate of the Polytechnic, a close student, and at the same time thoughtful even to chimeras, so his friends said. He believed in all dreams, railroads, the suppression of suffering in chirurgical operations, the fixing of images in the dark chamber, the electric telegraph, the steering of balloons. Moreover, he was not much alarmed by the citadels erected against the human mind in every direction, by superstition, despotism, and prejudice. He was one of those who think that science will eventually turn the position. Enjolras was a chief, Commiphera was a guide. One would have liked to fight under the one and to march behind the other. It is not that Commiphera was not capable of fighting. He did not refuse a hand-to-hand combat with the obstacle, and to attack it by main force and explosively. But it suited him better to bring the human race into accord with its destiny gradually, by means of education, the inculcation of axioms, the promulgation of positive laws. And between two lights, his preference was rather for illumination than for conflagration. A conflagration can create an aurora, no doubt, but why not await the dawn? A volcano illuminates, but daybreak furnishes a still better illumination. Possibly, Commiphera preferred the whiteness of the beautiful to the blaze of the sublime. A light troubled by smoke, progress purchased at the expense of violence, only half satisfied this tender and serious spirit. The headlong precipitation of a people into the truth, a 93, terrified him. Nevertheless, stagnation was still more repulsive to him. In it he detected putrefaction and death. On the whole, he preferred scum to miasma, and he preferred the torrent to the cesspool, and the falls of Niagara to the lake of Montfaucon. In short, he desired neither halt nor haste. While his tumultuous friends, captivated by the absolute, adored and invoked splendid revolutionary adventures, Commiphera was inclined to let progress, good progress, take its own course. He may have been cold, but he was pure, methodical but irreproachable, phlegmatic but imperturbable. Commiphera would have knelt and clasped his hands to enable the future to arrive in all its candor, and that nothing might disturb the immense and virtuous evolution of the races. The good must be innocent, he repeated incessantly, and in fact, if the grandeur of the revolution consists in keeping the dazzling ideal fixedly in view, and of soaring thither athwart the lightnings, with fire and blood in its talons, the beauty of progress lies in being spotless. And there exists between Washington, who represents the one, and Danton, who incarnates the other, that difference which separates the swan from the angel with the wings of an eagle. Jean Prouvaire was a still softer shade than Commiphera. His name was Jehan, owing to that petty momentary freak, which mingled with the powerful and profound movement, whence sprang the very essential study of the Middle Ages. Jean Prouvaire was in love. He cultivated a pot of flowers, played on the flute, made verses, loved the people, pitied woman, wept over the child, confounded God and the future in the same confidence, and blamed the revolution for having caused the fall of a royal head, that of André Chenier. His voice was ordinarily delicate, but suddenly grew manly. He was learned even to erudition, and almost an Orientalist. Above all, he was good, and a very simple thing to those who know how nearly goodness borders on grandeur. In the matter of poetry, he preferred the immense. He knew Italian, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and these served him only for the perusal of four poets, Dante, Juvenal, Aeschylus, and Isaiah. In French, he preferred Corneille to Racine and Agrippa d'Aubigné to Corneille. He loved to saunter through fields of wild oats and cornflowers and busied himself with clouds nearly as much as with events. His mind had two attitudes, one on the side towards man, the other on that towards God. He studied or he contemplated. All day long, he buried himself in social questions: salary, capital, credit, marriage, religion, liberty of thought, education, penal servitude, poverty, association, property, production, and sharing, the enigma of this lower world which covers the human anthill with darkness. And, at night, he gazed upon the planets, those enormous beings. Like Enjolras, he was wealthy and an only son. He spoke softly, bowed his head, lowered his eyes, smiled with embarrassment, dressed badly, had an awkward air, blushed at a mere nothing, and was very timid. Yet he was intrepid. Feuilly was a working man, a fan-maker, orphan both of father and mother, who earned with difficulty 3 francs a day, and had but one thought: to deliver the world. He had one other preoccupation: to educate himself. He called this also delivering himself. He had taught himself to read and write. Everything that he knew, he had learned by himself. Feuilly had a generous heart. The range of his embrace was immense. This orphan had adopted the peoples. As his mother had failed him, he meditated on his country. He brooded with the profound divination of the man of the people over what we now call the idea of the nationality, had learned history with the express object of raging with full knowledge of the case. In this club of young utopians, occupied chiefly with France, he represented the outside world. he had for his specialty Greece, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Italy. He uttered these names incessantly, appropriately and inappropriately, with the tenacity of right. The violations of Turkey on Greece and Thessaly, of Russia on Warsaw, of Austria on Venice, enraged him. Above all things, the great violence of 1772 aroused him. There is no more sovereign eloquence than the true in indignation. He was eloquent with that eloquence. He was inexhaustible on that infamous date of 1772, on the subject of that noble and valiant race suppressed by treason, and that three-sided crime, on that monstrous ambush, the prototype and pattern of all those horrible suppressions of states, which since that time have struck many a noble nation, and have annulled their certificate of birth, so to speak. All contemporary social crimes have their origin in the partition of Poland. The partition of Poland is a theorem of which all present political outrages are the corollaries. There has not been a despot, nor a traitor for nearly a century back, who has not signed, approved, countersigned, and copied, ne variator, the partition of Poland. When the record of modern treasons was examined, that was the first thing which made its appearance. The Congress of Vienna consulted that crime before consummating its own. 1772 sounded the onset. 1815 was the death of the game. Such was Feuilly's habitual text. This poor working man had constituted himself the tutor of justice, and she recompensed him by rendering him great. The fact is, that there is eternity in right. Warsaw can no more be Tartar than Venice can be Teuton. Kings lose their pains and their honor in the attempt to make them so. Sooner or later, the submerged part floats to the surface and reappears. Greece becomes Greece again. Italy is once more Italy. The protest of right against the deed persists forever. The theft of a nation cannot be allowed by prescription. These lofty deeds of rascality have no future. A nation cannot have its mark extracted like a pocket handkerchief. Courfeyrac had a father who was called M. de Courfeyrac. One of the false ideas of the bourgeoisie under the Restoration, as regards aristocracy and the nobility, was to believe in the particle. The particle, as everyone knows, possesses no significance, but the bourgeois of the epoch of La Minerve estimated so highly that pour Dieu, that they thought themselves bound to abdicate it. M. de Chauvelin had himself called M. Chauvelin, M. de Caumartin, M. Caumartin, M. de Constant de Robes, Benjamin Constant, M. de Lafayette, M. Lafayette. Courfeyrac had not wished to remain behind the rest and called himself plain Courfeyrac. We might almost, so far as Courfeyrac is concerned, stop here and confine ourselves to saying with regard to what remains. For Courfeyrac, see Tholomyès. Courfeyrac had, in fact, that animation of youth which may be called the beauté du diable of the mind. Later on, this disappears like the playfulness of the kitten, and all this grace ends with the bourgeois on 2 legs and with the tomcat on 4 paws. This sort of wit is transmitted from generation to generation of the successive levies of youth who traverse the schools, who pass it from hand to hand, quasi-cursors, and is almost always exactly the same. So that, as we have just pointed out, anyone who had listened to Courfeyrac in 1828 would have thought he heard Tholomyès in 1817. Only, Courfeyrac was an honorable fellow. Beneath the apparent similarities of the exterior mind, the difference between him and Tholomyès was very great. The latent man which existed in the two was totally different in the first from what it was in the second. There was in Tholomyès a district attorney, and in Courfeyrac a paladin. Enjolras was the chief, Combeferre was the guide, Courfeyrac was the center. The others gave more light, he shed more warmth. The truth is, that he possessed all the qualities of a center, roundness and radiance. Bahorel had figured in the bloody tumult of June, 1822, on the occasion of the burial of young Lallemande. Bahorel was a good-natured mortal, who kept bad company, brave, a spendthrift, prodigal, and to the verge of generosity, talkative, and at times eloquent, bold to the verge of effrontery, the best fellow possible. He had daring waistcoats and scarlet opinions, a wholesale blusterer, that is to say, loving nothing so much as a quarrel, unless it were an uprising, and nothing so much as an uprising, unless it were a revolution. Always ready to smash a window pane, then to tear up the pavement, then to demolish a government, just to see the effect of it. A student in his 11th year. He had nosed about the law but did not practice it. He had taken for his device, never a lawyer, and for his armorial bearings a nightstand in which was visible a square cap. Every time that he passed the law school, which rarely happened, he buttoned up his frock coat. The paletot had not yet been invented and took hygienic precautions. Of the school porter he said, "What a fine old man," and of the dean M. Delving Court, "What a monument." In his lectures he espied subjects for ballads, and in his professors occasions for caricature. He wasted a tolerably large allowance, something like 3,000 francs a year, in doing nothing. He had peasant parents, whom he had contrived to imbue with respect for their son. He said of them, "They are peasants and not bourgeois, that is the reason they are intelligent." Bahorel, a man of caprice, was scattered over numerous cafés, the others had habits, he had none. He sauntered, to stray is human. To saunter is Parisian. In reality, he had a penetrating mind and was more of a thinker than appeared to view. He served as a connecting link between the friends of the AB 100 and other still unorganized groups, which were destined to take form later on. In this conclave of young heads, there was one bald member. The Marquis d'Avaray, whom Louis XVIII made a duke for having assisted him to enter a hackney coach on the day when he emigrated, was wont to relate that in 1814, on his return to France, as the king was disembarking at Calais, a man handed him a petition. "What is your request?" said the king. "Sire, a post office." "What is your name?" 50 Aigle. The king frowned, glanced at the signature of the petition, and beheld the name written thus, Lesgle. This non-Bonaparte orthography touched the king, and he began to smile. "Sire," resumed the man with the petition, "I had for ancestor a keeper of the hounds surnamed Lesgules. This surname furnished my name. I am called Lesgules, by contraction Lesgle, and by corruption L'Aigle." This caused the king to smile broadly. Later on he gave the man the posting office of Meaux, either intentionally or accidentally. The bald member of the group was the son of this Lesgle, or L'Aigle, and he signed himself L'Aigle. As an abbreviation, his companions called him Bossuet. Bossuet was a gay but unlucky fellow. His specialty was not to succeed in anything. As an offset, he laughed at everything. At 25 he was bald. His father had ended by owning a house and a field, but he, the son, had made haste to lose that house and field in a bad speculation. He had nothing left. He possessed knowledge and wit, but all he did miscarried. Everything failed him and everybody deceived him. What he was building tumbled down on top of him. If he were splitting wood, he cut off a finger. If he had a mistress, he speedily discovered that he had a friend also. Some misfortune happened to him every moment, hence his joviality. He said, "I live under falling tiles." He was not easily astonished, because, for him, an accident was what he had foreseen. He took his bad luck serenely, and smiled at the teasing of fate like a person who is listening to pleasantries. He was poor, but his fund of good humor was inexhaustible. He soon reached his last sou, never his last burst of laughter. When adversity entered his doors, he saluted this old acquaintance cordially. He tapped all catastrophes on the stomach. He was familiar with fatality to the point of calling it by its nickname. "Good day, Guignon," he said to it. These persecutions of fate had rendered him inventive. He was full of resources. He had no money, but he found means, when it seemed good to him, to indulge in unbridled extravagance. One night, he went so far as to eat 100 francs in a supper with a wench, which inspired him to make this memorable remark in the midst of the orgy: "Pull off my boots, you 5 louis jade." Bossuet was slowly directing his steps towards the profession of a lawyer. He was pursuing his law studies after the manner of Bahorel. Bossuet had not much domicile, sometimes none at all. He lodged now with one, now with another, most often with Joly. Joly was studying medicine. He was 2 years younger than Bossuet. Joly was the malade imaginaire junior. What he had won in medicine was to be more of an invalid than a doctor. At 23 he thought himself a valetudinarian, and passed his life in inspecting his tongue in the mirror. He affirmed that man becomes magnetic like a needle, and in his chamber he placed his bed with its head to the south, and the foot to the north, so that, at night, the circulation of his blood might not be interfered with by the great electric current of the globe. During thunderstorms, he felt his pulse. Otherwise, he was the gayest of them all. All these young, maniacal, puny, merry incoherences lived in harmony together, and the result was an eccentric and agreeable being whom his comrades, who were prodigal of winged consonants, called jollily. "You may fly away on the 450s, Jean Prouvaire said to H. Joly had a trick of touching his nose with the tip of his cane, which is an indication of a sagacious mind. All these young men who differed so greatly, and who, on the whole, can only be discussed seriously, held the same religion, progress. All were the direct sons of the French Revolution. The most giddy of them became solemn when they pronounced that date, 89. Their fathers in the flesh had been, either royalists, doctrinaires, it matters not what. This confusion anterior to themselves, who were young, did not concern them at all. The pure blood of principle ran in their veins. They attached themselves, without intermediate shades, to incorruptible right and absolute duty. Affiliated and initiated, they sketched out the ideal underground. Among all these glowing hearts and thoroughly convinced minds, there was one skeptic. How came he there? By juxtaposition. This skeptic's name was Grantaire, and he was in the habit of signing himself with this rebus. R. Grantaire was a man who took good care not to believe in anything. Moreover, he was one of the students who had learned the most during their course at Paris. He knew that the best coffee was to be had at the Café Lemblin, and the best billiards at the Café Voltaire, that good cakes and lasses were to be found at the Hermitage, on the Boulevard du Maine, spatchcock chickens at Mother Sauget's, excellent matelotes at the Barrière de la Canette, and a certain thin white wine at the Barrière du Compat. He knew the best place for everything, in addition, boxing and foot fencing and some dances, and he was a thorough single-stick player. He was a tremendous drinker to boot. He was inordinately homely. The prettiest boot-stitcher of that day, Irma Boissy, enraged with his homeliness, pronounced sentence on him as follows. Grantaire is impossible, but Grantaire's fatuity was not to be disconcerted. He stared tenderly and fixedly at all women with the air of saying to them all, if I only chose, and of trying to make his comrades believe that he was in general demand. All those words, rights of the people, rights of man, the social contract, the French Revolution, the Republic, democracy, humanity, civilization, religion, progress, came very near to signifying nothing whatever to Grantaire. He smiled at them. Skepticism, that carries of the intelligence, had not left him a single whole idea. He lived with irony. This was his axiom, there is but one certainty, my full glass. He sneered at all devotion in all parties, the father as well as the brother, Robespierre Jr. as well as Loiseroles. They are greatly in advance to be dead, he exclaimed. He said of the crucifix, there is a gibbet which has been a success. A rover, a gambler, a libertine, often drunk, he displeased these young dreamers by humming incessantly, J. Amons les fils et J. Amons le bon vin. Air, vive Henry IV. However, this skeptic had one fanaticism. This fanaticism was neither a dogma, nor an idea, nor an art, nor a science. It was a man, Enjolras. Grantaire admired, loved, and venerated Enjolras. To whom did this anarchical scoffer unite himself in this phalanx of absolute minds? To the most absolute. In what manner had Enjolras subjugated him? By his ideas. No, by his character. A phenomenon which is often observable. A skeptic who adheres to a believer is as simple as the law of complementary colors. That which we lack attracts us. No one loves the light like the blind man. The dwarf adores the drum major. The toad always has his eyes fixed on heaven. Why? In order to watch the bird in its flight. Grantaire, in whom writhed doubt, loved to watch faith soar in Enjolras. He had need of Enjolras. That chaste, healthy, firm, upright, hard, candid nature charmed him, without his being clearly aware of it, and without the idea of explaining it to himself having occurred to him. He admired his opposite by instinct. His soft, yielding, dislocated, sickly, shapeless ideas attached themselves to Enjolras as to a spinal column. His moral backbone leaned on that firmness. Grantaire in the presence of Enjolras became someone once more. He was, himself, moreover, composed of two elements which were, to all appearance, incompatible. He was ironical and cordial. His indifference loved. His mind could get along without belief, but his heart could not get along without friendship. A profound contradiction, for an affection is a conviction. His nature was thus constituted. There are men who seem to be born to be the reverse, the obverse, the wrong side. They are Pollux, Patroclus, Nissus, Eudamidas, Ephestion, Pechmaja. They only exist on condition that they are backed up with another man. Their name is a sequel and is only written preceded by the conjunction, and their existence is not their own. It is the other side of an existence which is not theirs. Grantaire was one of these men. He was the obverse of Enjolras. One might almost say that affinities begin with the letters of the alphabet. In the series O and P are inseparable. You can, at will, pronounce O and P or Orestes and Pylades. Grantaire, Enjolras' true satellite, inhabited this circle of young men. He lived there, he took no pleasure anywhere but there, he followed them everywhere. His joy was to see these forms go and come through the fumes of wine. They tolerated him on account of his good humor. Enjolras the believer disdained the skeptic, and a sober man himself scorned this drunkard. He accorded him a little lofty pity. Grantaire was an unaccepted Pylades, always harshly treated by Enjolras, roughly repulsed, rejected yet ever returning to the charge. He said of Enjolras, "What fine marble!